I absolutely love Legion.
Thank you.
Loved. And so I'm curious, when you pitched it to FX, at the beginning, did you know it was going to be 3 years? Was that your goal? Or were you sort of like, I have this idea, let's see where it goes?
Well, I kind of knew it was going to be 3 acts. I can say that. I knew that in telling a story about mental illness, let's say, that starts with David where he was, which is he'd attempted suicide. He was in the hospital. That there's a kind of journey. Unfortunately, that's a cycle, right? You go from your lowest point to hospitalization, to taking your meds, to stabilizing, to thinking, I don't need these meds anymore, to going off your meds, to going down the rabbit hole and then back. You know what I mean? So that felt to me like if you substitute love story for meds, right? That, David gets out of the hospital in that first hour. He's in love. That love buoys him. He ends up getting to from a place where he doesn't understand anything that's going on to a place where he understands everything that's going on. You know what I mean? And then, unfortunately, he's put in this position by the woman he loves that makes him betray the woman he loves, the same woman, in 2 different time periods. And that gets him to a point where he's off his meds and his decisions are less and less rational. And then he's down at the bottom, and he's either gonna come all the way back, or that's the end of him. And once you complete that story, the only place to go is back through that cycle. So that's why it was the 3 seasons. And I didn't know at the time if 3 acts meant 3 years. It could have meant 5 years. It could have been the acts more spread out. But what I learned in that second season of Legion, when I was wrestling with a lot of episodes that were really long, was that this show doesn't want to be long. I would reach a point in an episode of Legion when I was editing it where I would think, this episode wants to be over right now. Like even if there was more great stuff to come, it's a lot to absorb. There's a lot of the sort of more surreal images, the fact that your brain has to work to kind of figure out where you are and what things mean. And you can only ask the audience to do that for so long before it starts being work and not fun, And it felt the same with the overall story, which is, I suppose we could have kept going, but it felt like better to make a complete statement that you want more of than to make something where people go, I think that's enough of that.
Sure. I loved the ending of the series. Did you always know that was the ending from the beginning, or did you find it along the way?
I found it along the way. I guess I didn't know from the beginning that literally the first and the last images would be the same. But it did have a kind of, poetry to it. It felt like when I figured it out, and it's probably something I figured out in season 2. I think, of where this journey was going to have to end.
The ratings were never awesome on Legion, but it was a critical darling. Everyone who reviewed it, I mean, it got great reviews. Do you think it was those reviews and the buzz that sort of helped keep it on the air? Because it never got like 10 million people watching, or whatever some huge hit.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I mean, obviously I have a larger relationship with FX, and we certainly had conversations about it. I mean, the 2 things that happen when a thing isn't successful ratings wise is you have to talk about, is it time to end this? And also, are you spending too much on it? Neither of those conversations we really had. I think that they were not unhappy when I said the 3rd year is the last year. But I think they were hugely proud of the show, and critically, its critical reception and just its perception, there are a lot of superhero shows that as good as they are, often come down to good versus evil, might makes right, and we were doing something else. And I think they really appreciated kind of owning that something else. Now, if I were making that show now in a Disney universe, would the budget, would they be forced to end it early? They might. They're under different management, and it's a different world. But luckily, I got it in under the wire.
One of the things that I loved about the way you told the story was the visuals and just where the camera was and the in-camera effects and the narrative style, the choices you made. Can you sort of talk about the difficulty in, I think you had 21 days to make your pilot and the regular show was like an 8-day shoot. How the hell did you pull that off on the schedule you had?
Well, I would always tell the directors, let the simple things be simple, right? Because some people came into Legion thinking that every shot, every angle, every moment had to have some gimmick to it. It was like, well, that's not really good storytelling. I mean, the reality is, if you have good production design and great actors, like most of the time, the camera doesn't need to do that much. Do you know what I mean? And there are scenes which are emotional or character driven or information driven, in which the most important thing in the scene is that you get the information. So I don't want the camera doing this crazy thing, your Michael Bay spin, like that's not going to help me convey anything. The other thing is that I never wrote any visual gag that I hadn't thought through how to pull off, So a lot of what I did on Legion was to sit with the directors and go, you're overcomplicating it. Like literally, I want something that you could do with a sleight of hand. Episode, where David was going into everybody's minds and he went into Gene Smart's mind, and it was this sort of like early video game with the text, and like you are in a cave, and they would type like, we walked down the cave and everything. And there was this moment where where he typed jump, and the moment he had entered, the ceiling dropped and hit them. And it's like, that's just a very easy thing to do in a black void. You don't have to get stunt people involved, So a lot of what I did was to say, cinema is already a trick. Like it's not, you don't have to go as crazy and go full ILM on this. You can simplify it. So, but it really, you have to have bold, iconic images. And one of the mandates that I had in crafting each episode was that there had to be these moments that when you saw the trailer for next week, you were like, how did they do that? We have to watch that one.